Welcome to episode 20 of Followers of the Cross. This is your host, Jason Reynolds. This is one of the last interviews I have from the International Christian Retail Show. The audio quality will be a little bit off as the media worked in a large room with a lot of interviews going on at one time. This interview is with Peggy Miracle Consolver, author of Shepherd, Potter, Spy, and the Star Namer. This fascinating title has a fascinating story about a shepherd boy who is a Gibeonite. The Gibeonites were a nation living in Canaan when Joshua led the Hewbrews into the Promised Land. I'll let Peggy tell you more about the book.
The book is about a 12-year-old shepherd boy in the late Bronze Age, which is the time period that Joshua led the Israelites into Canaan. So the point of view of the book, though, is this 12-year-old Gibeonite boy living in Canaan, and the Hewbrews are approaching. For a whole year, rumors have increased. First, just rumors from a caravan that went through. Then refugees began to trickle in who were fleeing from the approaching Hewbrews. And in the beginning, my shepherd boy is just that, just a shepherd boy, just barely getting into then the family business of pottery. In that, he realizes a lifelong dream of getting outside of his valley. Went all the way to 9 miles to Jerusalem, 17 miles to Jericho. And then, as the threat of invasion was imminent, he was called on to be one of the spies that camped out on the ridge above Jericho, watching the Hebrew camp at Gilgal, to give warning to his family and the villages in the valley. So that's... And the Star Namer?
Yeah, the Star Namer.
That's the faith element. Okay, this story is told in very close up detail in Joshua 9 and 10. These people are not mentioned at all previously. Mm-hmm. They're mentioned one other time, 400 years later. Why did they do what they did? Differently than anybody else that was already in Canaan, who were just going to rise up and fight to the death. Why did they go to Joshua and say what they said and do what they did? That's what my story is about. And so I've constructed a family, and I gave them a faith element. So all of that part is fiction. Mm-hmm. But they did what they did and said what they said for some reason, and it was something they were seeking. They were seeking the true God. And so just because there is a star that in the ancient Near East language, that means the heretofore and the hereafter. Okay. And stars and constellations were used as storytelling keys, Mm-hmm. So they wondered if there was somebody behind those stars that named those stars that was watching over them.
Awesome. And so does the book, how far along in the history of the Exodus does the book go? The entry into the Holy Land?
The beginning of the story is 1 year before the end of the 40 years.
Okay.
So when Moses strikes the rock the second time, in Joshua chapter 20. Numbers chapter 20. That's the beginning of the last year. And so my family over here in Canaan is just living their life. The Hewbrews are going through all that from Numbers chapter 20 to Joshua 1.
So it seems to me a very creative way to get into that story. I think most people would just go the route of the Hewbrews as the point of view.
how did you come up with this particular concept, and did you have trouble finding out enough of the historical type detail?
The way I came to this was I just was concerned about those people and why they did what they did. So I wanted to see why they approached Joshua in humility and said, "We are your servants." When asked why they did what they did afterwards, when Joshua confronted them, they said, "Because we've seen what your God does for you." So that told me there is a heart attitude there of seeking a true God. So I chose pottery because I took a class in Old Testament history. Pottery is the number one archeological indicator, that and coins, of actually dating the levels of archeological dig. It just seemed natural to tell it from their point of view. So I went on an archeological dig in Israel.
Oh, wow.
For research.
Okay. And did the group you were with, did they find any sort of significant find?
It's Associates for Biblical Research, and they are based in Pennsylvania. And for the last several years, they've been digging in Kirbet el-Makadar, and they believe they have amassed a lot of evidence to prove that this is the site of Ai. The village that was conquered, or the town that was conquered just before the episode of the Gibeonites going to.
Okay. They have been finding a lot of archaeological finds in the last few years there in Israel.
Yes,
a lot of things, a lot of significant findings, and that, to me, that's just the hand of God on that.
Exactly. And they've not yet found anything that disproves God's Word. We went on the dig in 2010, and it was awesome.
Okay.
I did a lot of research on how they lived in the Bible times and so forth. There's not a lot, but then adding to what I found, what would I do if I had, this was my family's mode of operation when I was growing up, was make do with what you have. So you take away the electricity, you take away this, you take away that. You know that if you're going to go hunting with a bow and arrow, you might have to build the bow first. So that sort of thinking.
Yeah.
And so I'm told that I nailed it.
Okay.
As far as getting into the time. And it's essentially, what would you do if you had nothing? Somebody asked me, well, what color, my crick group, you didn't tell us what color his outfit was. Well, then I had to spend a whole day researching natural dyes. Because this is 1407 BC, and it is in Canaan. So I had done they had oaks, so they had acorns. So they could dye things brownish.
Awesome.
And I've written a study guide that is going to come out in September. Okay. The study guide for this book. Okay, because this book came out of a Bible study.
Okay.
Out of my reading through the Bible chronologically for several years. And so that's how the book came about. Just kept stopping on those two chapters in Joshua and thinking, there's more to this story.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the book is available at any Christian retailer. It's with Ingram distributors, so it won't necessarily be on the shelf, although that would be nice, but it can be ordered by any Christian retailer or Barnes & Noble and others, Amazon.com.
Peggy, that's all the time for today, but I appreciate it. Thanks for joining us.
That's all the time for today. Check back soon for more interviews. Thank you for listening.